At this time, I would like to welcome the Chief Technology Officer of IP Secure and the Chamber's 2020 Cyber Council Chair, Rich Valdez. Rich, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Amanda. I appreciate that intro. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rich Valdez, and I serve as the Chamber's 2020 Cyber Council Chair. I just wanted to say hello and give you all a quick glimpse of into our cybersecurity ecosystem. Housed in the Chamber, the Cybersecurity San Antonio program is the lead convener and brand manager for our region's cybersecurity ecosystem. San Antonio is the second largest cyber hub in the United States. We're blessed to have a diverse set of resources in our own backyard to help us navigate through this crisis. Cybersecurity San Antonio works to convene, connect, and brand our community across all sectors throughout Bexar County, nonprofits, higher education, K-12, school districts, startups, industry, local and state government, as well as federal and military partners. For more information on this, you can always get involved, and please visit www.sachamber.org/cyber, and we'll have that on the slides as well. With that, it is my pleasure to turn it over to my esteemed colleague and one of the best-looking guys here, Mr. Richard Perez, President and CEO of San Antonio Chamber of Commerce. So, Richard, over to you. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you, Rich. Appreciate the introduction and appreciate your good work as our head volunteer there at the Cybersecurity Council. Well done. And I want to thank everyone for joining us, of course. You know, we have almost 100 people that are on the line with us today, and so I'm very, very excited to have you all join us as we discuss two critical topics today: privacy and security during the COVID-19 crisis. As you all know, we are living in unprecedented times. As our nation grapples with the public health crisis, our businesses are facing uncertain futures, and our communities are coping with staggering unemployment numbers. At the same time, our students have been thrown into distance learning, and many parents and guardians are struggling to balance working from home and schooling from home at the same time. We must therefore be vigilant and learn how to protect ourselves, our families, and our businesses from cyber threats, while also understanding how to manage risk and privacy concerns. From Zoom bombing to email phishing and social engineering, our aim with today's webinar is to share practical information that will help you to learn, ask questions, and seek answers that fit your unique situation. Before I introduce our guest speaker, I want to thank our inaugural Log in and Learn webinar series sponsor. For those of you all that are not as involved in the Chamber or don't know, we have begun to provide the vast majority of our work to our members in the general business community through this new offering that we're calling the Log in and Learn series. I'm happy to report that our first series sponsor is none other than the San Antonio River Authority. Sarah is an excellent community partner that has done amazing work to protect and enhance and focus resources on our San Antonio River, from here all the way down to the Bay, and I want to thank them for their continued support. And now, without further ado, I'm excited to introduce our first speaker, Mark Chamberlain. Before joining USAA in 2009, Mark worked at Bank One and Nationwide. Last month, Mark retired from his position as Executive Director of Information Security at USAA. He is now in the midst of planning his next career endeavor, so please stay tuned. Along the way, Mark served as Chairman for 3 national information security communities in 3 different industries: aerospace, insurance, and banking. He led the 2016 San Antonio Chamber of Commerce Cybersecurity Committee, which was chartered to define San Antonio's Good to Great to Global G3 map. That was an initiative that we had that year under the leadership of then Chair Rene Flores. And he was also the 2018 Chairman of the San Antonio Chamber of Commerce Cybersecurity Council. Mark is a founding contributor to the Financial Services Sector Coordinating Council's International Cybersecurity Profile version 1.0 body of work. And Mark holds a BS in Design Engineering Technology from Brigham Young University and received a Howard Hughes Graduate Full Study Fellowship for his MS in Engineering Management from Portland State University. He has been a certified information system security professional since the year 2000. Mark, thank you for your service to the Chamber. We are proud to call you friend. The microphone is yours.
Thank you, Richard. I hope everyone can hear me.
Yeah,
I appreciate the introduction. Mostly what I've done the last month is clean up the front yard and do some work in the backyard. So that's great. I would like to take a minute for a second and just do a shout out to the Chamber of Commerce. I think Richard, Amanda, and Rich have really done a lot to strengthen our community and pull us all together and to keep us informed. I'd also like to shout out to other pillars in our community, the first responders, the medical community, the grocery stores, the schools and universities, food banks, churches, good neighbors. Where would we be without all these things? And lastly, just to mention the 1,126 fellow San Antonians who tested positive for the virus, including the 46 that were reported new yesterday. They're in our thoughts and prayers, and we're pulling for all of them and their families. Today, my topic is on cybersecurity protection during the pandemic. And there's been an absolutely unprecedented amount of change in our lives over the last several weeks. And I'm sure we all have our own interesting stories. I'd like to, if you can go to the next slide, tell you about really 3 different time periods. There's the before pandemic, leading up to say about March 11th. There's the pandemic since March 11th, and we're kind of in the middle of that box. And there's the future after the pandemic. And I want to talk about just the different risk considerations that we've had in each of those. So before, we were stretched in usual ways, long days at work, getting kids to activities after school, and working to pay off bills, the mortgage, and save a little for ourselves. We interoperated as households and communities in routine and predictable ways. Inherent risks on the internet, which is before security controls were applied, were generally considered across the industry as high on a low, medium, high scale by security practitioners. And from a business network infrastructure all the way down to your handheld device or the corporate desktop, we relied on time-tested, organization-approved technology cyber practices for both business and for school. Once in a while, some of us got to work occasionally from home using a corporate VPN. If you can go to the next slide, please. Oh, this slide. This is the right slide. I'm sorry. That's the slide. So since March 11th, we've created a new normal. And that new normal has evolved at a very rapid pace. The stay-at-home orders and the social distancing have shifted many of us out of the workplace and school place to computing from home. Where we used to have our BYOD cell phone to take to work, we now have our work using our own bring your own IT infrastructure, all the way from our own personal networks, desktops, to include our laptops, tablets, and phones. And that's not only for parents, but also for K through 12 and university students. And we're doing it all at the same time in the same house. So many of our networks weren't designed for that type of risk exposure, but are being tested live as we speak each day. The key point I want to leave for that box is the online security and availability of our home networks and devices has never been more important. They're now the primary connection to our work, which is our livelihood, to our schools, and to our social communities. If you were to Google on coronavirus scams, you'd see a plethora of headlines that talk about hundreds of scam websites being shut down. If you go to the Federal Trade Commission, they'd instruct you on their website on specific behavioral do's and don'ts to avoid being scammed. Social engineering, via some form of phishing, is still the primary attack method underlying most security breaches. It's my belief that the best protection begins by increasing your phishing IQ. To that end, I want to refer you to a website, and if you can bring it up on screen. At this website, you can take a test to see if you can determine between a legitimate email and a phishing email. And I'd invite you all to give that a shot. At the end of the test, you'll be given a score. If you can get, and it'll help you understand how vulnerable you are based on what you know. And if you think that's fun, then get everybody in your household to take the IQ test, and you can see how vulnerable your at-home network is. All too often, people are the weakest link in the security chain, so it pays to really up your IQ. And now if we can go back, I'll talk about the green box there. This is after. And as we come out of the orange box and into the green box, we're not exactly sure what that green box is going to look like. Time will tell. One of the largest changes we've made can be seen in a mirror. We've changed. We've been through a lot. We've had a lot of different experiences that we didn't think we would have. We'll see the world differently. Some of our preferences have been more fine-tuned. Hey, do you like working at home more than you like working at work? Things might change. And depending on your at-home experience the last several weeks and the next perhaps several weeks, it may be really hard even if you wanted to go back to business as usual. However, whatever happens in the future, you'll want to make sure that you secure it. Next slide. And so I'll address these topics, which are really about cyber protection and what you can do. Let's go to the next slide. Again, the underlying key point here is the online security and availability of your at-home network and devices is important. Think of it as a hygiene factor, just like you do masks, the gloves, hand soap, alcohol rub. It's really important that you have a secure home network. Again, because it's your primary connection to your work, your schools, and your social communities. I want to give some credit to a company called SANS. SANS, S-A-N-S, all uppercase, is a global, reputable, and enormous source for information security training and security certification. And by clicking on the top link, we're going to go to the SANS website. And on this site is a security awareness work from home deployment kit. And if you can scroll down, you will see that it is divided for organizations. There's a link that goes to documentation. For individuals, there's a tip sheet. And for parents, there's information on how to secure your environment for your kids online. There's also frequently asked questions. Now, if you can go back to the slide, all of the other links on this slide come from that same site. They're all done by professionals that operate globally, and it's all free. They have our best interests at heart, and I thought it was very well done. I didn't want to recreate the wheel. I thought this was the best information I've seen, and I just wanted to share that. Let's go to the next slide. So the important thing, I think, is really just to get started. What better time than now? Make it a household activity. Get your family together, secure your infrastructure all at the same time. And in the time I had, I put together a 15-item cyber protection checklist covering many of the essential protections you'll need. SANS goes into a lot more detail. There's some great videos, particularly around protecting your children. My recommendation is to go to the SANS information first, sometime after the broadcast when you can pull your family together. Go there first, open up the checklist at the same time, jot down things, add things to the checklist that you want to make sure you take care of, and then walk through the checklist. So if we can open the checklist now. We put out a disclaimer, just use it at your own risk. This is an aid to help you with your education and as a planning tool. And now if we can go to the next tab over. I've taken what I thought were some of the high priority items, listed them in blue text in column C, identified what they protect in column B, identified the threat that they protect against in column D, gave you a space in column E to write your notes and questions, to give you space in column F to put in your status for each item, and then a completion date. And even when you get done completing it, you'll need to come back. These things evolve over time, and so it'd be important to put your the last day that you update it. And then just keep this and refer to it, maybe twice a year. But the first one is just attending today's event. For action item number 1, it's important to change the defaults of admin username and admin password on your router and on any other devices that you have. You can read the rest. I've got some tips in there. Number 2, change default settings for your SSID name. Again, some tips. Number 3, choose strong encryption for your router. Some additional information and some tips. Choose strong passwords for everyone that uses your network, your SSID. And you can go through, if you can scroll to the very bottom, you can go through those one at a time. I did want to call out some at the very bottom, yeah. So right there, number 13, it's important to do regular backups, and if you can, choose an automated method that best meets your needs. Recognize the number 14, you are your own best defense, so get educated and use common sense. And the last one, even if you don't have any children, it's great to look at what you can do to help protect our community and the children in it. And with that, I just want to say thanks for the opportunity. Good luck in securing your own network, and maybe we'll cross paths in the future. Thank you. Turn it back to Phillips. Actually, to Richard, I think.
Yes, Mark. Thank you for sharing the information about Sonic Wall, about SANS, and that's all very helpful. And of course, we'll push all this out to all the participants. They could watch this via tape later, and we'll also, so we'll have your presentation and the like on our website as well. But thank you for your perspectives on cybersecurity before and during the crisis. We also appreciate your thoughts on what business as usual might look like after the crisis. So great job. We appreciate you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll now transition, sure. We'll now transition from cybersecurity to privacy with 2 outstanding speakers to guide us. First up is Maria Phillips from the Security and Privacy Risk Advisory Services at RSM US LLP. Based out of Chicago, Maria has over 10 years of aggregate executive experience. In her current role, Maria delivers advice and consultation regarding complex risk matters, assists engagement teams in internal audit matters, and is responsible for ensuring that clients comply with professional and regulatory standards. Maria focuses on privacy and security, and she is also a member of the firm's blockchain practice and assists clients in the privacy and security concerns surrounding smart contracts, cryptocurrency, and in the crypto fund arenas. Maria serves on the steering committee of RSM's Hispanic Organization for Leadership and Advancement, also known as HOLA, which is an employee network group. She is an active participant in both the local and national chapters of a number of diversity and inclusion-focused professional organizations. Maria, we're thrilled that you're here. The floor is yours.
I am very happy to be here. I am hearing an echo. Is anyone hearing an echo?
No.
All right, that's great. All right, well, in that case, let's get started talking about security and privacy and how they interact. So if we could skip a couple of slides forward, we don't need to do the intro. Perfect. So you heard a lot about security, and the kind of the big focus of security is that you want to protect your data. What data do you have, and how do you protect it, right? It's kind of the 4 walls methodology. privacy is more focused on what type of data you have, why you have it, and why it's important. So, you know, the privacy rights and obligations piece for corporations is important because you have to respect not only the people that work for you, but also the people that work with you. The kind of underlying piece that ties all of these together is obviously data, right? What is data? So if we want to shift over to privacy, we can go to the next slide. So this is a quote I really, really enjoy, Gabriel Garcia Marquez: all human beings have 3 lives: public, private, and secret. And this kind of goes to the crux of privacy and why we care about it. There are things that we probably don't want people to know, and maybe that we do want people to know, but either way we have rights around that, and we have obligations around that as corporations. Next slide, please. So why do we care now, right? We've always had this information. We've always been humans, right? Why do we care now? Well, this is a joke, but it's also serious. Lieutenant Commander Zuck trying to study humans. You know, we have a lot of information, and it is a tremendous amount, and how it's changed over time is what has really led to kind of the privacy regulation boom that we're seeing now, both in the regulatory space and in the, you know, industry best practices space. When you think about the volume of data that you put out on a daily basis, there are lots of elements of data. What I mean by elements are name, address, phone number, right? All of the things that pertain to you. There are more collection methods. You're looking at not just, hey, I filled out a contact us form somewhere, or I sent someone an email. You're looking at metadata being collected when you browse the internet. You're looking at cookie data being collected every time you visit a site. And when you put all of those things together in the aggregate, it kind of becomes to be more impactful. And that's where we talk about metadata. And that's where you have to start thinking about, what do people have? What is collected? Where is it going? Who is it being shared with? And what permissions are there around that, right? Told a company that they can do something with my data? Where have I told an application that they can do something with my data? And that's where you start feeling slightly more uncomfortable, right? That's the moment where you start thinking, wait a minute, there's probably a lot out there on me. And when we think about this from the corporate lens, what information have we collected? What have we told people about it? And what permissions have they given us to do things with it, right? Who do we give it to? Next slide, please. So this is what makes us think about things differently now. If you look at the CCPA, which is the California Consumer Protection Act, I realize that we're in Texas and that's not what we're talking about. However, it is the first U.S. law of its kind to regulate consumer data in this way. We've all probably heard the buzzword of GDPR, which is the one in the European Economic Area. But this definition is extremely impactful because being the first law, it's going to set the precedent for how we do things in the rest of the country. So take a moment and look at this definition. When you start thinking about what could potentially fall under here, you're probably going to start realizing that it's everything, right? Everything. What identifies, relates to, describes, or is capable of being associated with me, or could potentially be linked directly or indirectly to me. And it's not just me, but it's me or my household. So when you think about this, every possible element in the history of elements falls under this category. So as a corporation, as a company, you're thinking about, man, this is everything that I know, whether they've told me, whether I've collected it, whether I've smelled it, whether I've seen it, whether I've heard it, it's all personal information, and it's now being regulated. Next slide, please. So when we think about privacy regulations, there are others, right? They're not necessarily focused on consumer data, but they are focused on particular protections. So every time that one of these has come to pass, the joke that I've made from the start of history is, this is why we can't have nice things, right? When someone makes a mistake, we can't have nice things, and now the government has to step in and put together some sort of regulation to keep us in check. When there are fines, then people start behaving the way that we probably thought they should have behaved from the get-go. So these are very, very This is not an exhaustive list. These are very specific, right? Everyone knows HIPAA probably. You want to protect your health insurance information, your health information. This is very widespread. Everyone has to think about this, every organization, because we also collect information on our employees when it comes to health data, right? We have insurance benefits that we give out. We have family benefits that we give out. So this is focused on specific types of data, but not an exhaustive list. Next slide, please. So from the corporate level, are you the slowest zebra? And what do I mean by that is, are you the person or are you the corporation that is really falling behind? If you're the slowest zebra, you're going to get hit. Now, whether that be from a security incident, whether that be because of a breach, whether that be a class action or anything else, just private right of action litigation, or being the target of a hack. All of these things can happen if you're the slowest zebra. So what are some things that you can do to not be the slowest zebra? Next slide, please. And why do we care, right? So not being the slowest zebra can impact us in many ways. And when we think about privacy, it's obviously a corporate risk and it's a business risk. You have to know all of these things and how they play into each other and how the puzzle pieces fit together. So, what are your regulatory expectations? What are your regulatory obligations? What information collection do you have? What handling practices do you have? What exposure points across your organization do you have? And how they relate to the different organizational departments, right? You're going to have a lot of people doing a lot of things separately, and what autonomy have you given them to make decisions about how to do that? And how that relates to the COVID pandemic is even more important, because regulators have already come out and said, we're not going to relax the way that we enforce these regulations. So it is up to you to make sure that the environment has changed, but you still have to do what's right. So looking at all of these things together is very, very important from the enterprise level. Next slide, please. So how do you go about figuring out how you're not the slowest zebra, right? How do you start if you've never thought about this before, or maybe you thought about it in a piecemeal manner? So the first thing is know what regulations protecting individual data privacy apply to you. What will you have to do, and how are they evolving, and how are they expanding? So knowing is definitely first step. The next step is understanding which of those apply, which are likely to apply, where is your business going, and how will it need to scale whatever it's doing in order to frameworks do you maybe want to think about implementing into your organization. Then you move, you determine the gaps in your program, and then plot a chart for compliance, right? You never want to start with, let's just do one thing at a time. Then after you figure this all out, you move from the reactive approach that you just did to a proactive approach of, all right, let's think about what's coming down the pipeline, where are we seeing the landscape evolve, and what can we do to be more proactive, right? If we start implementing things little by little or low-hanging fruit, we don't have to, frantically scramble when a regulation comes our way. Then you implement the overall privacy program. This will address any organizational plans to address privacy concerns or changes. It's going to talk about the categories of data that you have, why you have it, who you share it with, if data is used for the intended purposes or for the stated purposes. All of these things together will formulate into a comprehensive plan. Next slide, please. So during a pandemic, very slight changes to this plan, right? Once you review all of your policies and procedures, you have to think about the relevance of these and the application for compliance, because now we have a workforce that is not in the workplace. They are not using the same type of technology that they would be using in the office. They're not using the same kind of applications that they're using in the office sometimes, and you can't monitor how they're doing things and what they're doing. So making sure that you review your policies and procedures and update them as necessary. Understanding, again, what regulations apply. More regulations may apply as you shift your workforce. Less regulations may apply. Either way, you have to understand where your regulatory compliance standards need to be. Then you determine what gaps there are, same way that you would in any other time, and implement any privacy program that addresses these new concerns. You may have to put out new policies. You may have to put out a new or updated acceptable use policy to tell your employees what they can and can't do. And to the security side, there are many, many more concerns, so you want to make sure that you've addressed them because you can't watch people the same way that you can in the office. The big key takeaway is, right, stay out of the spotlight. We always joke you don't want to be in the news for the wrong reason. So stay in the limelight, be at the top of your game, and don't end up in the news for a breach because you didn't think about these things during the pandemic. Next slide, please. I've put together some resources here. You can click on these at your leisure. We don't have to go through them now. My favorite is obviously the International Association of Privacy Professionals. It is where all privacy people go for all sorts of things. That is the resources page. And then I've put together some English and Spanish resources. And certainly if you want any more, you can reach out anytime. Thank you.
All right, Maria, thank you so much. We appreciate that. A great presentation. And of course, our goal is to not be the slowest privacy zebra in the local business community. Of course, it's not a good reflection of ourselves and of our organization. So thank you for that. And we'll have several questions for you that are coming in at the end. Last but not least is Melissa Unsell-Smith. Melissa is president of Rectify, a document cleansing company that leverages machine learning to protect consumer identities and other private information when data is shared with third parties. Melissa is an automation expert, solving challenging dilemmas and developing best practices for data privacy. Over her tenure, Melissa has protected tens of millions of documents. She has leveraged this expertise to co-invent patent-pending workflow methodologies. Prior to founding Rectify, Melissa worked in AT&T's corporate legal department, where she led project management for mergers and acquisitions, as well as litigation discovery. Subsequent to that, Melissa co-founded Elmcore, a litigation discovery provider focused on serving AmLaw 200 law firms and corporate counsels. In her free time, Melissa is an avid volunteer focusing on data stewardship, as well as women in tech and the arts. Melissa currently serves on the board of Girls Inc. and is the board chair of the Classical Music Institute. Melissa, thank you for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Richard, and hello, everyone. Nice to see everyone here participating in this webinar, and I hope everyone is staying healthy and safe. And to piggyback on both Mark and Maria, I want to talk a little bit about the privacy side in regards to businesses. And maybe you're not a highly regulated entity. There are still methods and procedures you can undergo to make sure that you're being a good steward of data. I also wanted to provide some tips for families in the at-home environment. So I will be doing that at the end of the presentation as well. I like to start with this quote, and that is, privacy is the currency you pay to play in our digital ecosystem. That comes from one of my mentors and friends, Dennis Damon. And I think that really percolates in the mind, right? The digital playground that we play in comes at a cost. And so we're going to talk about some of that today. Next slide, please. So I want to start with just some general important thoughts to really get you thinking about the environment that we're in today, but things that have existed in the past as well. The first one is, if something creates extreme convenience, there is a trade-off. And you have to think about what that trade-off is. For example, if you have a Gmail account, a lot of people use Gmail, and that's a free service. But in exchange for that, Google has access to everything you're talking about and the people you're interacting with, right? That's a trade-off. Those things are fine. The thing is, having awareness is the first step to enabling your own decision framework. So having awareness of these things in the digital universe allows you to then make smart decisions about how you want to engage in our digital ecosystem. And consider how you interact with tools and your behavior. Now, Maria mentioned some privacy regulations that exist today. In the US, we don't have a federal privacy regulation. So I personally assume some level of malintent with an organization until there is a federal regulation in place. And that's just the mindset and the lens that I choose when I look at what I'm interacting with online. Next slide, please. So I want to go through top 5 privacy considerations for businesses. Now, there are a lot of considerations in play. There's a lot more exhaustive list, but I pulled together what I thought were 5 things that could be fairly actionable and prevalent during the time that we're in. The first thing is to ensure transparency. And being transparent about the data you collect on your customers and how you handle that data is extremely important. And think about it from your side as well. There's actually a statistic that shows that 80% of consumers want some control of how companies use their data. And because there is not a lot of transparency on how data is collected, there's some unease and lack of trust. So if you as a business can start creating more layers of transparency, consumers are going to resonate with that, and that really helps build your brand presence as well. So that's an opportunity. The next one is data minimization. And this is all about using the data that you only need to use on your customers, on your employees. So if you are storing information that is not necessary, you need to delete it. If it's not needed anymore, completely delete the data and create a cadence for doing this, whether it's quarterly or twice a year or once a year. You create those policies and procedures in your workplace. The third is to educate employees on best practices. One of the things we're seeing now is there's a lot of cross-pollination happening between devices and workplaces now being in our home. And what's acceptable is you might have employees that choose to forward sensitive business or client information to their personal accounts to work on that information later on a different device. And that's very risky for you as a business. So making sure that you have a policy or standardization in place and you educate your employees on how not to do that and potentially expose information. Next slide, please. The fourth key topic here that I wanted to address is adhering to retention policies. And this can seem a little cumbersome and boring given the time that we're in, but it's really important. You need to look at, this lives really well by the data minimization token, but looking at your retention policies and following those. And one important thing you can do, especially now, is when you're archiving data, you don't necessarily, depending on your business and your industry, need access to consumer information. And there's a term called personally identifiable information. So that could be phone numbers, mailing addresses, email addresses. Now, if you're archiving data that's old, that consumer identifying information has probably changed. The phone number may have changed, or mailing address may have changed. So you need to redact it, delete it completely from your archival data set. What that will do is that will add an extra layer of protection in case malicious behavior happens or a breach happens. If someone gets a hold of that archival data set, there's no really high value information there. The fifth tip is to align your internal policies and your external consumer-facing policies with the current pandemic guidelines. What we're seeing is that there have been changes in regulation. For example, with HIPAA. HIPAA has actually eased up on some of the regulations so that we can provide healthcare in this different environment that we're now living in. So depending on your industry and where you're operating in, you need to keep up with those changing rules and regulations. My advice is to actually map out the jurisdictions that you're operating in, whether you're a global company or operating in North America, and map those to applicable resources so you can look at those on a weekly or monthly basis and figure out what's going on. Next slide, please. And now I want to talk about my top 5 tips for families, because there's a lot of activity going on in the digital landscape in our homes right now. And I want to talk about a few key components that are important to consider as you move forward. The first topic is video conferencing and web browsing. I highly recommend that you use a secure video conferencing tool, something that is not really free, because remember, free or easy convenience often means lack of privacy. So if you have the means to do so, if you can spend a low monthly fee on something like WebEx or Microsoft Teams, that's a really good option for interacting with your family and your friends. And I realize that not all of us have control over what video conferencing tools we use. I'm even forced to use Zoom. Zoom is currently in a class action lawsuit because it's invading privacy of consumers. And so what you can do if you are using Zoom and are resorting to having to use that, there's a couple of advice steps that you can take. One is, if you have access to an additional device in your household that is not necessarily used a lot for web browsing or any other like video streaming, watching movies or anything, if you have kind of a separate, even an older device, use that device solely for your Zoom calls and don't use it for anything else. If you can't do that, what you can do is ask the host of the Zoom meeting to make sure that they have their security settings set to the highest level when operating those calls. I also recommend using private web browsers. I have a resource in one of the resources slide at the end, but I use DuckDuckGo. It's a completely private web browsing tool, so it does not track or store cookies on your machine. And just remember that extreme convenience, those options lack privacy. The last tip is really looking at a couple of regulations that pertain to children under 13 and students. And that's the Children's Online Privacy Regulation and FERPA, which is for education. If you have students in your household that are engaging in e-learning or games, it's important that if you're using something outside of what the school district is recommending, that you review those terms and conditions of those companies that are providing that service to make sure that they have one of these 2 regulations that they're adhering to in their terms of service. Next slide, please. Entertainment and games. So we're all trying to find new ways to have fun, interact online, social media. I do want to point out here that there are things such as social engineering that are going on during these times. An example of social engineering is a while back, there was actually a 10-year challenge where you could post a picture of you 10 years ago and a picture of you today. I think recently I've seen some people posting graduation pictures from either high school or college. Just be aware that participating in those types of things, although may be fun, and it might be fun to see that from your family and friends, but those photos can be used for facial recognition technology and to train those technologies. And we're not quite sure how those pictures are being used, that they can track how you're aging as an individual, and it can be used for surveillance in the future. So until we know more about how companies are using that data, I choose to not participate in those things, just not knowing where that data is going to live in the future and how it's going to be used. So again, it's all about your awareness and you deciding what you feel comfortable with. Also a device check-in. Install updates regularly. This is more on the security side, but make sure all your devices are up to date and secure. I also recommend using webcam covers. So whenever you're not using a webcam, that device or tape, you just tape it up. It's completely covered on your iPad, on your laptop, even on your phone. And then any devices that you're not using, power them off completely. That includes things like your Amazon Echo or Google Voice. Those use active listening, and they are storing your data. So if you're having an intimate conversation with your family or a private conversation with your family, unplug those devices if they're not in use. And next slide, please. And here's some list of resources that I wanted to share with you all. The first one is one of my favorite organizations, the Future of Privacy Forum. This is a global organization. They have a great website on privacy in pandemics. This is great for businesses too. There's global information and regional information on the site, so that's a great resource. For families, I recommend Stay Safe Online. A lot of great resources there for some of the things I talked about today. And then I mentioned a couple of slides ago about private web browsing, and the link to that is there at vestfco.com. But thank you all for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions when we're done. Thank you.
All right. Awesome. Thank you. That was fantastic. A lot of food for thought and things that certainly I have never considered, but I certainly am going to think about them now. So thank you. We'll move on to the question and answer portion of the event. And please submit your questions through the function at the bottom. And we've gotten several questions, by the way, but we'd love to have more, and we'll try to get through as many of them as we can. Those that we can, of course, we'll try to get them to the speakers and have them answer, and then we'll post them on our website going forward, which is our rapid response website. So why don't we start with the first one, and I'll pose it to you, Melissa, given that you've just finished and you've made me think of something through your presentation. You talked about Zoom. My kids have recently started to use which I've never heard of until like 3 weeks ago, called House Party. And so it's kind of like this. You got people and you can see them and everybody talks. Tell me about that. Do you have any knowledge of the safety and, the security aspects of that one?
So I am not familiar with House Party. I'm going to have to look it up now. But you can take the same precautions for anything that you're not familiar with or a new app that you're using. Again, I would recommend to make sure that those settings that whoever the host is setting up the meeting can make those settings to the most secure. And then if you have a device that's not a clunky iPad laying around, anything, use that to engage with those online tools and applications that are coming out and new.
Thank you. Going along the same lines, Zoom has been in the media in regards to security risks and hacking/bombing. Are there safer video conferencing applications that one can use, especially when they're being used by kids?
Yes, there are alternative tools that you can use. I recommend using something like WebEx. This is what we're using today. It's operated by Cisco, fairly highly regarded and highly secure. A lot of corporations use this. I do believe they have a special right now where you can sign up for a free account. And if not free, if you needed more people or more time, I think it's about $14 a month, which is kind of a minimal price to pay for the level of security that it offers. Other alternatives are things like Microsoft Teams, Amazon Chime. Those are the ones that come to the top of my head. You can do a Google search for most secure web video conferencing tools. And there are some great articles that I've seen recently about people really showcasing the security features of those.
Excellent. Great. So the next question is, what is the best course of action if I happen to be the slowest zebra and click on a link that is not secure? What should I do? Maybe we'll throw that one over to you, Maria.
Sure. So if you click on a link, it depends on if you've done it from your work computer or your personal computer. So I'm sticking to the corporate umbrella. So we're going to say you've clicked on it from your work computer. The first thing you should do is tell IT. Obviously, don't put in any information. Sometimes the links for phishing emails are dangerous just in the nature of clicking on them, but sometimes they ask you to enter credentials. So do not click on links and enter credentials generally. That is a pretty safe bet. I think Mark mentioned that with phishing emails. So first thing, tell IT. Second thing is report if it came from an email, report that email to spam, mark it as spam. And IT may or may not tell you that there need to be other steps. Some people will say, turn off your computer. That's not always the answer. Some will say, take it offline. That may sometimes be the answer, but always just go to IT.
And so IT being your personal, so whoever at your office is responsible for computers, networking, et cetera.
Yes.
Okay. So do you have an example of if I'm doing it at home and I'm, a private citizen and happen to click on something that's wrong? And I know that you wanted to do the corporate example. Do you happen to have a non-corporate example?
I'm going to punt that one to Mark, the security expert, because he'll have more to say.
Okay.
I think the very first thing you do is hit the oh dang button. I shouldn't have done that, right? And then take a big breath and ask, okay, what just happened? Certainly you're going to learn a lesson to be more inspectful of what you click on in the future, but ask yourself, okay, what just happened? Did something get downloaded? Do you have appropriate updated patches on your system? Do you have appropriate antivirus? If not, you'll probably want to get that. A lot of times people click on that and they don't realize it's bad, but they might get something that might ask them then for a login. Might look like their bank or financial institution, and they'll go ahead and put the information in to log in, and then they'll realize, hey, this, or they'll feel like uneasy, and they'll realize they've just given up their credentials to their financial accounts, and that becomes a difficult thing. One thing to prevent mishap beforehand is to make sure that you use strong passwords on every website that really matters to you. Anything that has transactional data, anything where you're doing banking, investment, finance, anything where you've given it a credit card, anything that really that you care about. So a lot of the steps are best done well in advance of hitting the oh-dang button.
Or have a password manager. That's always a favorite. There are very, very inexpensive password managers on the market, and if you have one of those, that will definitely help you, because I think most private citizens are thinking about, oh, I can have a very, very complicated password. It's going to be great, but then I'm going to use the same one for everything. So that's not helpful. Or I'm going to have really complicated passwords, but then I'm going to put them on Post-its that I'm going to keep on my computer or on the device. So that is also not very secure. So you've just nixed out all the work that you've done by making a 72-character password. So password managers are a very good way to keep your password safe and secure, and also very complicated.
And Maria, a password manager, you would just go on and internet web search, or a password manager, or how do you find where those offerings exist?
So yes, simple Google search will give you a plethora of password managers, and they go anywhere from I think it's $20 or $30 a year up to much more expensive.
Excellent. Okay, super.
Can I jump in on that one?
Of course.
There is a website that contrasts all the top 10 password manager products, and I would be careful about acquiring one until you look at who the company is and where the company is that manufactured that product.
Got it.
If it's not a country or a place that you would trust, you'd be right to be wary of it.
Excellent. That's good advice. Mark, so here's another question. What are some of the tips that, and I think this one's to you, but anybody, shopping online. We're all doing it online. We're getting our groceries online, doing a whole bunch of things online. We have been, and we're doing it even more so now. What are some basic safety tips for shopping online?
I think it's always important to make sure that you don't click a link that comes into your inbox in an email. Make sure you type in the web address into your browser to get there. After that, I think just having your system set up securely would be really important. Your credit cards, because you shop online, you don't get the advantage of the chip that's built into your credit card. If you're shopping online and they call you, be wary of any call that you might get. I can't think of anything else at the moment.
Okay, that's good. That's a good start. Thank you.
Always stay alert.
Good.
It's much easier to think twice and cut once than to be sorry after the fact, and it takes a lot of time to try to undo something.
Excellent. There's another question. How does a small business begin to figure out costs related to putting together a security/privacy plan, and where can they go to start that process?
I think there's a variety of different consultants in the area. You could look up any of the big consultants. There's smaller ones, Deloitte, Ernst & Young, Protiviti. You could probably go to the chamber. There are consultants there.
Yeah.
That are
RSM, Mark.
Good answer.
Right here.
You can list all my competitors too. It's fine. It's fine. My suggestion is, if you're a very small organization, before you start thinking about consulting fees, because they can rack up very quickly, you can start with the frameworks that exist that are publicly available. Mark mentioned SANS, NIST, ISO. They've all put out privacy frameworks. My favorite privacy framework is the original GAP, which is, for any accountants in the room, it's not GAAP, it's GAPP. But it's also AICPA, so they just love acronyms that are confusing. But the generally accepted privacy principles is a fantastic framework that is available, and it's free. And you can start to think about the different types of things that you would need to implement in your organization to start. And then you can talk about consultants coming in and checking your work. But the first thing is, have some work done, because consultants will come in and tell you we'll build you everything, but it's not free.
I will also add to that if you use those frameworks that Maria is talking about, those are extremely helpful. And then if you are a small business, it might make sense to engage some privacy attorneys or counsel that can help with things like terms of service and privacy policies. That's also a good place to start. That won't be as costly upfront.
Excellent.
And there's also software available, TrustArc, OneTrust. OneTrust seems to be the leader in the market right now, where it is a monthly subscription fee that you can help put together some questionnaires, some risk assessments, even policies and procedures related to cookies. They'll do a cookie scan. So there's also software to help. Those two, I would probably say, are the best. There are smaller ones that I would not go to.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you, Melissa, Maria, and Mark. We're going to give you an electronic hand clap for the great job that you've done helping educate us on security, privacy, and the core issues for our communities. We appreciate your engagement. And of course, at Cybersecurity San Antonio, we're thoughtful and thankful, really, for your work and for being with us today. We look forward to sharing this session with the community at large. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to have it on our website. We'll record it. Generally, we can download the recording in about 24 hours, so we'll post it on our website. You can also keep the conversation going, of course, on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram at SA Chamber. And as I mentioned, we have a rapid response site called SA Chamber, rapidresponse.org. We'll have the questions that we posed and those we weren't able to get to. We'll get them to you all as the participants and get some answers and put them out there for everybody to be able to review. And so with that, please stay tuned for upcoming events, web events like this one. Our next one is in our congressional series with Congressman Chip Roy, which is coming up very, very soon. And with that, I'll ask you to be safe, be kind, and of course, take care of yourselves. And we say thank you on behalf of the San Antonio Chamber of Commerce. We'll see you again soon.